Listening to the new WCEG Network. You can follow us on WCEG Talk Radio or watch us live on your smart TV, YouTube, LinkedIn, and WCEG Network. I'm William Bill Edwards, your host for Wisdom Wednesdays. For the next hour, I am pleased to have as a special guest one who is no stranger to any of us, and a good friend of mine for many years, Dr. Rashad Richey. Dr. Richey, how are you?
I'm doing great, Mr. Mayor. How are you, my brother?
I'm doing just wonderful. We just delighted to have you here today, and I was talking to some of the people about you, and I got some stuff here I didn't even know that you did. But let me just give you a quick synopsis of who I'm talking to here today. An Emmy-nominated political analysis, daily author of the national TV opinion news shows, Indisputable with Dr. Rashad Richey. And if you haven't seen Indisputable, listen, I have seen it. I told him I only look at Indisputable and Roland Martin.
Yep.
He's the host of the Dr. Rashad Richey Review on Sirius XM Radio and weekly air personality, News and Talk at WAOK and V103 Radio. Now, Dr. Richey has a lot of accomplishments, and I know his story. That's why I get excited when I talk to him, because he has a story to tell, and I don't know if you want to share with you today, but Dr. Richey has several degrees. He's research-based director of education for federal policy reform for Clark Atlanta University. PhD in international intersectionality of political policies and religious norms, contextualized through Western and Eastern religion from Business University of Costa Rica. Master of Science in Applied Physics and Quantum Mechanics from UNEM. Master of Business Administration from Beulah Heights University. Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy and Religious Studies from Beulah Heights University. Bachelor of Science in Applied Psychology and European American University. And last but not least, this man is now getting a law degree from the Birmingham School of Law, where he's roughly 1 year from graduating.
Yes.
So my first question to you, my brother, tell me how you do all this.
Brother, if I tell you that it is somehow because of my intellectual prowess or some other magical instrumentation, I would be lying. This has very little to do with me. This has much more to do with how God created me. I get about 4 hours of sleep a night. That's all I need. That's all I require. So I maximize my day in a way that most people do not. So I literally have a 20-hour work day where I'm engaged, I'm active, and I'm productive. And so in addition to those degrees, I still work. I mean, I have multiple operations, and we do those operations every day. And outside of that, I love what I do. I love what I do. So learning to me is the great mystery and the great reward for being on this journey. If you're not learning, you're losing. If you're not learning, you're losing. We are a combination of 3 E's, nothing more. I tell my college students this all the time. We're a combination of experiences, exposures, and environments. If you want to change the core of a human being, you have to change their experiences, their exposures, and their environments. If you want to change who you are, if you want to continue to grow into a new and better version of yourself, you have to continue to engage in those 3 E's: experiences, exposures, and environments. And if those 3 E's become stagnant in your life, you become stagnant. You no longer grow. You're no longer challenged. So these things that I have degrees in, I was learning anyway. As a commentator, I learned policy. As a debater, I learned law. As a person who's highly interested in physics, I've studied physics for 12 years. And I've done this outside of the public spotlight. And, I said, I'm going to go ahead and get a master's in it. And next year, I'm enrolling into a PhD program in physics. So these are things I want to learn. I enjoy learning them, and might as well get a degree. That degree allows me to teach others. It's important we have conscious individuals inside of college classrooms. So if I'm going to learn it, I'm willing to go through the extra steps of being challenged on my learning so that I can get a degree and help others learn the way or the pathways that I've learned.
Yeah, well, wonderful, man. You're a role model. No doubt about that.
I don't know about that, brother. You're the role model. I'm hoping to get there one day.
Listen, let's talk a little bit about the media.
Okay.
And you got one of the top 5% podcasts in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And the responsibility of the media, Rashad, in terms of putting out healthy information that grows a community rather than tears it down.
Yeah. When media first started, and I remind all journalism students about this, media meant you and me. It meant everyday people. It did not mean a professional organization, because in the writing of the Constitution, in the framework, while media, or the right to speech, your freedom thereof, and your right to assemble, the freedom of the press, all of these freedoms or rights you already have. These rights are simply protected by law, but you have them. The government has an obligation to protect them. Here's what has happened in media. There's significant dysfunction in the implementation of media, or the execution of what we call media, because of irresponsible individuals who are media broadcasters or media figures. Anyone today can be a media figure. I think that's actually a remarkable thing. The challenge with that is when there's a misrepresentation. When you misrepresent your opinion as a fact, when you misrepresent your belief system as a fact, that's when it becomes problematic. When we got Fox News saying they're news, but in court documents, they say, no, we're not news, we're puffery. Well, we don't call it Fox puffery, we call it Fox News. And that created a disconnect, but really there had to be a response to Fox News. So when Fox News came and they became very opinionated, they slanted all the way to the right, you saw responses from the left. CNN at one time, they tried to be really, really down the middle. I remember, Mr. Mayor, when I was the director of the Georgia Democratic Party, anyone who worked for CNN, they were barred from contributing to the Democratic Party. This is because they were in the limelight for being too liberal, for being too biased for the left. CNN at one time was called the Clinton News Network. Well, that was given to them by Republicans. Republicans wanted them to be called Clinton News Network, and that caused CNN to have a response in the marketplace that sent directives to their employees: don't engage in any type of personal political speech, including contributions. Well, this is a gray area now, because now you would like media figures to be regulated in their personal and private lives. The reality is, Mr. Mayor, media has never been non-biased. No formation of media has been non-biased, but that doesn't mean it cannot be honest and authentic. I'm an opinion news anchor, and I'm very clear about the reality of my opinion part of what I bring to the table. And I don't try to make it seem as if I'm anything other than that. And I think that's the best you can hope for today as it relates to media and broadcasting in general.
Yeah. And every day today, a lot of people don't even look at the news anymore.
Right.
They don't want to hear the bad content. You know, it's full of, robbery and crime and things of this nature. But on a smaller sense, people in cities and counties would like for the media to be more responsible in terms of the things that they do that are positive. Okay. Then you get folks looking for sound bites and stuff like that to create issues that are not positive. So as a citizen, they feel out of control because they don't know who to go to and say, "Hey, this guy was not right." Can you retract some statements or whatever the case may be? How do the everyday citizen handle the misuse of the media?
That's a great question. You got to stop being okay with being spoon-fed. That's it. The reality of media is this: it takes a small chunk of a big meal and it gives you the part that it thinks you would agree with. It's called reinforcement bias. And so everyday citizens, individuals who actually read or consume this information, we have an obligation to ourselves and our communities to check out what we read to make sure it's verifiable. Now, if it's a big national story, you can go to places like Snopes.com, check it out. There's typically good information about where the rumor started, if it's a rumor or not, and what facts are available about this particular thing that's spreading on social media. But when it's hyper localized, you do not have that kind of reservoir. You don't have that check and balance. So you have to put it upon yourself. The reality is, dear brother, that many people are simply willing to be spoon fed because typically we are intellectually lazy. I know some individuals don't like that terminology, but the reality is, if you get a piece of information and you're not willing to at least Google it to check it out, that is intellectually lazy. And then if you spew that information to another individual, you have now engaged in the propaganda connected to deceit in media. And I'm going to sum it up by telling this quick story, brother. And this is what changed me as it relates to media. There's a good friend of mine who took a position about 7 or 8 years ago that I totally disagreed with. This brother had a high-ranking position in a major civil rights organization. He wanted to come on my radio show and debate me on the position. At that time, I told him, that's ill-advised, brother. I don't want you to come public against me with this particular subject. It's going to look bad for you. He insisted. I knew it was going to be bad for him, but he was very persistent about wanting to do this and wanted to do it publicly. So I allowed it. At the end of that debate, which turned into an argument, I'm still growing as a broadcaster. I'm trying not to be as hypersensitive to certain things. I fell short of the glory, and I got really upset at the brother and ended up saying some things on that show that hurt him, not only personally, but it hurt my dear brother professionally. And he was faced with this mandate to resign because of what happened on that radio show. I didn't want my brother to resign. So I started to call the powers that be to let them know it was not that serious and that I'm not calling for his resignation. I actually am opposite of that. That didn't seem to work. So I went on air. I went on air to apologize for how I handled my brother. That still did not lift the mandate that he received to resign. Then I called a friend of mine, and I'm basically at this point, I'm sad. And I'm talking to a friend and I'm telling my mentor what happened. And he told me this story about a man who came into a new community and he wanted to get a promotion at a job. He just got hired. But there was another guy in this community, his neighbor, who wanted that very same promotion. Well, after the process, his friend, the neighbor, got the promotion and he did not. So he started to create a diabolical plan in order to get his neighbor either A, demoted, or B, fired. So he created a lie. Now, in my scenario, I didn't create a lie. I never would. But this is the point. This guy went around spreading one falsehood about his neighbor. That falsehood made it to management. Management did exactly what he thought they would do. They fired him. All of a sudden, that neighbor is broke, homeless, family has to move, bad things happened. So now the person who started the propaganda feels bad. And so they go to the priest and they say, preacher, here's what I've done. I need to correct this thing that I've done. And the preacher says, all you got to do is take these feathers in this pillowcase and put it at every doorstep that you told a lie to. Even though the man thought it was strange, he was so desperate, he did it. He took a pillow of feathers, put it at every doorstep that night, went to sleep, went back to the priest the next day and said, preach, I did exactly what you told me to do. I put a feather in front of every doorstep that I lied on this man too, every one of them. And the priest said, you got one more thing to do. Take this same pillowcase, pick up every feather in front of every doorstep. The man said, I can't do that because as I slept, the wind blew the feathers and they are now all over the city and beyond. There's no way for me to collect these feathers back. And the priest looked at him and said, son, so it is with your words.
Yeah.
So it is with your words. And that left an impression on me. So that's why I have become so exacting in my commentary and in when I use that platform to call for a resignation. It needs to be worth something when I do it.
Very good. I mean, you illustrate what we face every day, you know, in terms of this media, when we have to deal with media things like Facebook and Nextdoor and things of that nature. And people can say some of the harshest things, you know, because they have an avenue to say it. What is your opinion about media platforms of that nature?
You know, they are loosely called media platforms. So I'm going to go through a legal explanation and then I'm going to get into a more practical one. So for purposes of publishing, those types of entities, Nextdoor, Facebook, even YouTube, they are covered by a particular code section in federal law that basically says they're not really publishing the content. The person, the individual is the publisher, and this is basically just an open access opportunity for publishing. And because of that small caveat in what it is categorized as, because of that small caveat, it then takes responsibility away from the company and puts it directly on the person as the publisher of the content. Now, with that being said, traditional media, they actually have a responsibility, a legal obligation to make a good faith effort to get the story right. Because if they don't, you can sue them individually, okay, the company. But a publishing company that's not like a publishing company, for example, Nextdoor, it's up to the person. Now, we can argue about should that be. I definitely think companies should have a level of responsibility when people are maligned on their platform. But the current law just interprets it a little differently. So what does that bring us to? Freedom of speech. Freedom of speech. Now, freedom of speech is not absolute. If you utilize that freedom of speech in order to commit a criminal act or have somebody else do so, well, guess what? That's not covered. The government can penalize you. Also, when you lie on someone, when you misrepresent a fact, when you decide to go after a person's character or even tear down a business, tortious interference, all of these dynamics are now civil issues that you can be sued for, and it will restrict your ability to move freely like that without penalty from the government. So there are penalties. The issue is, Mr. Mayor, most people won't enforce them, right? So if somebody lies on you, you're a public figure, and I get lied on too. When they lie on us, it's really not worth us filing a lawsuit because that's really our only remedy in a land where freedom of speech is constitutionally protected. You have to enforce this freedom if it is not a criminal element, then the government can enforce it in that case. Now, you do have countries like Colombia. Colombia, they just got a Black female vice president. There's a law in the books that makes it illegal to use a racial slur against an individual. Well, a white woman wanted to go on camera, call the vice president a racial slur. She just got 3.5 years in prison last week. Okay. Now, we can argue about how heavy-handed that is. I can guarantee you this, a white woman won't do that again, at least this year in Colombia, because of how it was dealt with. All right. So you have these two extremes is my point. And we can have arguments about the benefit and also the non-benefit of both. But in America, we have this as a real systemic problem. You still got Fox News having to pay damn near $1 billion because of their lies. Right.
And that's the thing. I think people just get caught up. I so many people say, I don't want to hear nothing about the news. I don't want to be on Facebook no more. You know, I don't even go to Nextdoor or whatever the case may be. They're just tired. And I think there's got to be some sensitivity
Yeah.
from those who are responsible, especially in the news like 2 and 5 and 11. They'll say things, and even if it's wrong, but they won't come back and talk about that sensitivity that you had when you said with that individual. And I think that's wrong.
Let me tell you, man, it is wrong. And I've worked in local news for years. I remember when I first got my job at CBS 46 News. It's Atlanta News first now. Mm-hmm. And I'm in this newsroom, and these are very good people. They weren't trying to harm people for the sake of harming them. I'm sure I ran into a couple of journalists like that. But for the most part, these individuals were very, very good people, and they wanted to get the story right. And they thought about how it would impact this community and that community if told in a particular way. It was a very thoughtful process. So I got to benefit. I received a great benefit from having that kind of entry into the news world. But I've also had conversations with individuals who were wanting to get information from me to do a story where a story really didn't exist. It wasn't a story at all. It was just sensationalism that they could puff up to make it look like a story. And I've made my voice known in those avenues and those meetings as well. So that still happens, right? It comes down to character, dear brother. When you talk about ethics in media, it's no such thing. And I mean this intentionally. There's no such thing as ethics in media. I tell my journalism students this: find it. Where is it? Where's the website? What's the regulatory agency that governs it? Where do you sign up to register? It's not one. So what is the actual regulatory agency then? You are the person. We don't have to validate lies. We gravitate to them. It's unfortunate because anytime we gravitate to someone who's sensational but wrong, we're giving them more algorithm opportunity to be promoted in front of more people. We're feeding the beast just because we're interested in lies. And while the truth is still there, it dies a slow death in the realm of social media because we're not paying attention to it. We don't promote it or interact with it. And the game is fixed to do one thing: to get your attention. It doesn't matter if that attention is positive or negative. It's only rigged to get your attention. And as long as your attention is affixed on that particular subject, item, story, whatever it may be, they do not care that it is accurate or inaccurate. They just care that you are there looking at the content.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. It's this whole concept of feeding the beast.
Yeah.
We even have people who, and let's talk about citizens and what they do. When you continuously, as a citizen, give me your opinion of this. Mm-hmm. If you call a news reporter or a news deal on a story that may or may not be positive or may not be correct even, okay? Then they rush out with the cameras, mm-hmm. And they put everybody, they don't want to put everybody on. They want to put the ones that feed the beast on. Mm-hmm. That should be something morally or ethically wrong, with your professionalism of not trying to get the whole story.
Yeah, it should be, but it's not. And let me go back to what I said about there has never been unbiased reporting. I don't care what genre you're talking about. Right now in a local news segment, Mr. Mayor, that journalist gets 2 minutes to 2 minutes and 30 seconds to tell a story, okay? Mm-hmm. That already means that the journalist and the producer, they have to tell you what they believe is important to tell from this story that really takes 3 hours to tell accurately. They're going to tell it in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So their bias makes the decision about what content goes into that 2 minutes and 30 seconds. You're already on a level of bias there. And then after you engage in the investigative process, which is supposed to be a norm in every reputable news company, you're supposed to get both sides of a story, right? Well, you can stack the deck and get a weak side and then a strong side. You don't have to get two strong sides. It's not required. Okay. So you can have a person that represents position A. Position A says what happened here is absolutely illegal. Okay. And they can wax poetic about why. But you got to get B, which is an opposition to that. Well, you can get a law student fresh out of law school, if you choose to, who really doesn't know the law, but can make a quote. That's the requirement that you have as a journalist typically, and nothing more. You just got to technically have a presentation of both sides. And then naturally, you know, the favorite, they weren't available for comment. Well, you reached out to them an hour ago. Broadcast started, 50 minutes ago, but they weren't available for comment. That's another caveat. And when you hear someone say they did not immediately respond to our inquiry, what that means is typically the inquiry or the question to the other side of this affected party, that question took place probably within an hour. And there was no immediate response, but we're going to run this story today anyway.
Well, there's a saying that, bad things happen because good people do nothing.
Yeah.
And sometimes people are just like, when you talk about this beast, don't feed the beast. Just let it run. Just let it run its way through and be done with it. What do you think about that?
There are a couple of philosophies. So I often call news stations personally when there's a story, let's say Clark Atlanta University, right? If there's any crime that happens near Clark Atlanta University, you will hear local reporters say at Clark Atlanta University or on the campus of Clark Atlanta University, and it is not. Okay. So I will call and correct the record when I see that happening because they don't make that same mistake with Georgia Tech. If it is not on the campus of Georgia Tech, it could be 1 inch away from the property. They will not say it happened on the campus of Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech wouldn't play that. So that's one way, being conscientious enough to engage in those local entities and not be intimidated by them. So that's number one. Number two, to your point about feeding the beast. Okay. I think there's good logic about not feeding the beast. But there's also this element of, but you got to put something out there. You got to make sure, right? You got to make sure that there's competing information so that the truth is at least in the universe. And if there's a person who's seeking truth, that truth will find them and they will find it. So you got to make sure that truth is out there. So I understand the point of not feeding the beast. I also understand the requirement to put the truth out there. And listen, I still get questioned about even my history, right? When I was a teenager and a gang member and all of the ups and downs that I had in my youth and early 20s. I don't mind answering those questions. I don't mind being open and honest. I have a whole TED talk about it. The reason is because I understand the power of owning your narrative and being okay with the testimony that comes with that God-given experience, because you don't get from point A to B in your life without overcoming. And our overcoming is that God-like quality that he gave us, the ability to overcome obstacles. And if we deny that we are human beings who have overcome things, we deny the very existence of God nature. And so that's an aspect I bring to the media that most are unwilling to embrace. And I'm going to say this in closing on this part. When I first started local news, I did things people did not do. I still do not use a teleprompter, never have. They debated me up and down. You have to use a teleprompter. It's live news. I said, I would never use a teleprompter. My first year at CBS News Atlanta, doing it in a way that was completely different than anyone else, not throwing people under the bus just because it's a sensational story with very little substance. By me doing it that way, I got Emmy nominated my first year. I'm the only political analyst in CBS News history to receive an Emmy nomination. But that's because I brought me to the table and I did not bring a reflection of what they wanted me to be.
Well, that's very, very important. I just think that, what happens is kind of a point and counterpoint.
Yeah.
When it comes to story we're experiencing now. And the other people in the community are like, I'm sick and tired of this. All right. Yeah. somebody says something about Jane and Jane responds, and then it goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on some of these media platforms that we have. What's your comment on this kind of tussling on those?
Don't do it. It's not worth it. So if I tussle, I'm tussling because there's another benefit other than the argument. So if I tussle with Larry Elder, all right, online. I tussle with Ted Cruz on a tweet, okay? But that's because I can do something with that, all right? When it comes to everyday conflict, a very wise person helped me understand it a lot better. Do you remember Gene Ross, dear brother?
Yes.
Gene Ross, and let me give a big shout out to Gene Ross, legendary news anchor, legendary radio personality, legendary radio program director. She's the woman that discovered me. Gene Ross had a conversation with me when I was head of the state Democratic Party and said, we're going to bring you over here to WAOKMV 103. All right. So when we get things settled, we got the ink, it's starting to dry on the contract. I'm very much so me and very much so aggressive. And if you want to say something about me, be ready to battle, because I'm going to battle everybody. And so Gene Ross brought me to her office one day after the show. I had been going in on some people and they were going in on me, and I was back and forth for a long time. They got a lot of attention. She said, I want to show you something. And she brought up this thread of me going back and forth with this individual. She said, look at how many members you have on this page. And at that time, the page had maybe 5,000 members, okay? And she said, look at how many listeners you have. She said, this represents less than 1% of your listenership. You have spent hours on some folk that don't care about you, number one, make up less than 1% of the individuals you should be concerned about. And you gave them damn near all your time today. That one conversation with Gene Ross got me out of that. Now I'm intentional. If I want to engage, I will. You will not bait me into engagement. I choose to, I will, right? So that's the idea. That's how I present.
Well, there's a lot of bait.
A whole lot of bait, brother.
that goes on.
A lot of trolls out there, man.
Oh, I didn't say that.
I said it.
I didn't say that. But it's just the fact that people are just afraid to compete with media in terms of they feel they're mistreated, all right, but they don't want to compete with media. You remember I said that bad things happen because good people do nothing. Yeah. And they're just content with, oh, did you see that thing on Facebook the other day talking about John? He says, but no one ever asked it's true. Or they'll put something out there and they'll only get a portion of the story. Yep. I get that a lot. People come to me and say, well, let me just give you the real part of what's happening. So we just got to learn, Rashad, to do that. And I know that a responsible journalist like you has a responsibility to get both sides if it's what's needed. And we just don't get it all the time. This is what happened. The citizen spit on the sidewalk today, and we'll cover it, and then tomorrow we'll cover it again because you probably spit someplace else. And so people are frustrated, Rashad. And I'm here today to talk to you in terms of, how do we get ourselves out of this frustration? Do we, everybody has communications departments and sometimes they don't put the right things out. And when do we get in front of a story, rather than get behind it at once everything is put out? Because it seems like the first one who puts the story out is who they believe.
That is such an unfortunate truth.
Yeah.
Let me take you to Minneapolis. When the murder of George Floyd took place, the reason why there wasn't coverage initially is because all of the news agencies locally adopted the very wording of the police report. The police press statement said a man died while being apprehended from drug overdose. That's what they told us. Okay. Thankfully, enough citizens recorded to where we did not have to depend on the release of the footage from the police, which would have taken 1, 2, maybe 3 years. But all news outlets adopted the language, some of them in whole, fully. That's plagiarism. They adopted it fully, ran it as a news story. I can't tell you, brother, how irresponsible that is. The police, they have a vested interest in spinning a story like any other agency. You wouldn't accept a press release from Watershed Management like that.
Right.
You would not accept a press release from the mayor of the city like that. You would check it out. You would. Now, this has become a normative process in the United States of America. Many are getting hip to it. Many jurisdictions, many news agencies are starting to immediately question a police report or a police press statement when it's a news story in particular. But that is it right there. When you said people rather be first than be right, and here's why. Let's say you're first, because the numbers still work out for them, brother. You're first. That means you get shared the most. So you went from 100,000 people who would typically read your content to well over 1 million now because you were first. All right, you were first. And as the story develops, you're realizing your initial article is wrong. So you go in, you digitally update it so that it updates the full document. You don't even come out with another press release or article to correct the first one. You just update it. And sometimes they update it, brother, without even mentioning that they got it wrong the first time. They're winning on the numbers because all they're trying to do, understand the game of profit. All they're trying to do is to get that article in front of as many people as possible. Why? Because embedded in that article is an advertisement. That advertisement will pay typically 0.1 to 0.9 to sometimes even 1 penny per view, depending on how long you interact with that ad. So if they have an incentive to take a story from a 100,000 fold, meaning consumer fold, to 1 million, you have increased profit tenfold within a matter of seconds. And you have no penalty. The people don't penalize you anymore for getting it wrong. So in all cases, typically, you're still winning as a business operation, but we're losing as a societal construct because you're feeding us lies that we're consuming in good faith and then promoting those lies to our own detriment. So you have a positive for the independent agency, but you have a negative for us collectively. And that's how the business of it works.
Dr. Richey, what about, I mentioned earlier about communication departments and local government. Wow. How can they balance themselves out with larger media like CNN and stuff like that? How can they balance themselves out? Because, a lot of things, the good things in our community never get told.
That's right.
Right. And a lot of times our communication departments are, once again, they're responding to something and not getting the message out. How can communication departments, what can they do to have some relationship with those media entities that there's a win-win situation?
That's a really great question. And my answer is going to be politically incorrect, but true. Journalists are petty like anybody else. They can be petty like anybody else. Judges can be petty. We've seen it. Okay. We've seen people in the highest positions known to humanity become petty. Don't think that journalists cannot be just as petty as you. Please don't ever make that assumption. Why is that information important? That information is important because if you have a comm director, if you have a communications department, that communications director needs to understand how to navigate egos, how to finesse them, and how to check them. All of that has to be done in appropriate context. You have to know which one to allocate when. That type of interplay, that relationship between your communications director and the general press is imperative. It is not about the messaging. We typically hire people in those departments who are very good at creating messaging, writing a speech, creating an article, making a press release. That's their IQ. Their intellectual quotient is huge. They're smart people. But nobody cares about your IQ if they can't stand your EQ, which is your emotional quotient. And that is the part of many communication directors. That's the part that, in my opinion, separates the good from the great. If you have a communications director that understands the mechanics of the story and that understands the mechanics of the relationships between them and the media, you have a grand slam. But usually it's one or the other rather than both. And so that's one dynamic. And I've had to consult for communication departments for governmental and private entities myself. I always have a very straightforward transparency approach. It gets you good favor. You can even negotiate 3 or 4 stories, positive stories a year. If you make an agreement with every news agency around you, listen, we're going to be transparent. I'm going to give you this number of exclusives because stuff is going to happen. We are government. I'm going to make sure you have this number of exclusives per year. And the trade-off is this. When we do something right, I want to make sure that you promote it. And you got to give me at least 2 this year. That's it. And when you come to the table in a way that's mutually beneficial, because remember, this is a profession for them. It's a profession. I go into professions trying to understand the culture of that profession so that we can align our goals where they may meet, rather than being completely adversarial all the way through. And then at the end of that adversarialness, who loses? Typically, the person that you work for. The communications department has done a bad job at making sure that the story is told right because they pissed off the reporter or the news anchor doesn't like them. So those things, listen, is it right? Of course not. None of that stuff is ethical or moral. None of it is. But that's what happens. And so my job, if I go into an agency, I need to make sure I get the best outcome. I can preach about the ethics that are required, and I can lecture about them in a college class, hoping to create a better stock of news broadcasters. But in the midst of the war, you have to be concerned about winning the battle. And that becomes an issue in communication departments across the country.
And just a little further with that, I think one of the problem with the communication directors and community departments is that while they're trying to do what you say, then there's responses coming from other parts of the government that has not been approved by them.
Right.
But they don't know what they're saying. If it's a communication department that you have, what should be the relationship with them and, say, the governing body, in terms of putting information out?
So let me get the structure right. If you're saying if you are the government lead and you have a comm department, how should that relationship be?
In other words, if I'm in the communication, if I'm head of communication, something up, I'm answering it. Okay, I'm putting a news release out or whatever. But somewhere over here, some department head or other governmental person has also put something out. And they all don't match,
right.
Having their perspective. We get that a lot. I don't know whether all of us should come into the communication department, be approved before we send out, or we should be as one voice.
Well,
in attacking a responsibility.
I think there's a duality here that must be respected. If it is an official response from the government or the governmental agency, if it's an official response from the city or the county or the state, that official response should be one. It's one response. If another member of that agency, regardless of their capacity or position, if another member of that agency would like to say something that's contrary or even that adds on, it should be very clear that they are doing this in their very personal voice. And it is not connected to an actual operation of the agency.
Mhm.
The reason why that part is important is for context. It's important that viewers or listeners understand that difference. I'm okay with, as a matter of fact, I encourage it sometimes, with an elected official or somebody else in government coming out saying something that may be contrary to a press release, because we know sometimes that's a controlled message. Okay. I'm okay with that. I just want to make sure you're representing it as it is. This is not coming from the government office. This is coming from you as an individual, posted on Facebook, represented as a personal statement. Because once you represent it as a personal statement, it's weighed as a personal statement. When you have ambiguity about if it's a personal statement or a statement from an actual governmental office, you are weighing these statements on the same weight, and it is not comparable. So I'm good with it. I just want to make sure people say accurately what they're representing.
Talk to us. I want you to talk to us again about verifiable truth.
Okay.
All right. And its responsibility. And on both parts, even on the media's part about the situation, or the government's part about something too. Because there should be a fact in there that says that these issues that I portray are factual issues. You know, I always tell people, you can always have your own opinion, but you can't bring your own facts down.
Right. That's right.
And that's what I say. So this verifiable thing, I mean, am I going to run every time something comes into the media and I got to pick up Wikipedia or Google or something like that? When I know that it ain't right. All right. So what happens? I mean, I give you a classic example. I had a lady who was a reporter. She said something that was not true. And I went to another friend of mine in that same network. And he said, well, call her boss. You know, I don't know if this calling her boss is gonna make a difference or not, but that was not what I thought was gonna happen.
Right.
So, you know, so our when something happens to us, we don't know who we call. You can call the boss, you can call the newsroom, and are they going to actually take action, or what the deal is?
I can answer that question from being an insider. All right. 90% of every news director that I've met, when there's a complaint about one of the reporters and it reaches their desk, they've always taken it seriously. It does need to be a credible accusation. I'm going to give you one example. Okay.
Right.
We had a reporter at CBS 46 under the old regime of leadership. CBS 46 was recently purchased by Gray Media. This has nothing to do with Gray Media. So under the old leadership, there was a reporter who it was obvious she was a Trump supporter. All right. She was very conservative. She put it on her social media. But listen, she has a private social media. She has freedom of speech like anybody else, right? As long as when she comes on the news, she's leaving that bias there and reporting fair and accurately, right? She decided it was a very bad thing that Mr. Rashad Brooks, remember the brother that was killed by the officer at the Wendy's? Yeah. She thought it was a very bad thing that Mr. Rashad Brooks and his family, now remember, he's dead, that they received a proclamation from the city of Atlanta. I think this was led by Antonio Brown, who was a councilman at that time.
Sure.
So she does this story that basically calls into question the nobility of giving someone this kind of honor who has been killed by the police under questionable circumstances. Now, at this time, the cop was actually, I think, indicted for murder, I believe, by this time. So she does this story. She doesn't get the other side. She doesn't get an opposing view. I think the story was something like, you know, the family wasn't available for comment. I mean, why would a family even comment about that? They're receiving a proclamation on behalf of their dead son. You shouldn't even ask them to comment on your negative story. So that story, it bypassed the program director. The program director at a local news station, they're supposed to look at the story. They're supposed to say, okay, all right, these elements are good. Who's your opposing party? All right, that's good. They just check boxes and then the story goes. I'm telling you how it works, all right? Well, this particular program director did not check the story. That reporter was known to be biased, so you needed to be on high alert anyway. Story airs. I get a call from the NAACP. Okay. I didn't see the story. I had no idea. I don't even think I was working that day. I look at the story and I'm like, not only is it lacking principle, it's factually inaccurate. She reported that no one has ever received a proclamation from the city, posthumously. That was a lie. Many people have, right? So she was saying things that weren't even accurate based on information provided by the clerk of the city. She gets fired. The program director gets fired. Okay. That happened. It was quiet. None of that made the news, but it happened within 2 weeks of that story. I make that point to say this. If it had not been for the NAACP making that one phone call, that person may still be reporting crazy stories like that. But somebody from the NAACP picked up the phone and called. It got to the big director, all right, the guy in charge of all of it. He looks at the story. He agrees with the NAACP and fires everybody who was involved.
Just before we close out, I want you to talk a little bit about today also about this whole concept of defamation and slander. And when does that come into play?
So I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not giving legal advice. I always have to say that. I do know about defamation. Go ahead, dear brother. What'd you say?
I understand.
Yes, all right. It depends on who you are, number one. A lot of people don't like to hear that. If you're a public figure, like myself and like Mr. Mayor, the standard is different, right? You all can say things about us as public figures, and we have to prove a little bit more. We have to prove that if you lie on us, your lie was intentional and you had this reckless disregard of truth. You intentionally engaged in lies, knowing they were lies, and you promoted or published those lies. So now you have your defamation. If you are a private citizen, intent doesn't matter as much. If it's a lie and that lie hurt you, you can prove damages happened because of that lie. Well, that's an actionable suit typically. Okay. Defamation is meant to make whole. A defamation suit is meant to make whole what you have disrupted by submitting a falsehood. But the reality is, dear brother, less than 1% of actual defamation cases ever get filed. Defamation happens every single day, all right, to a lot of people. Once again, in order to enforce those systems, you have to enforce those systems. Those systems do not carry a civil police force. You are the police force. You have to enforce it by either A, threatening to sue when you know there's an actionable case, or B, filing that suit. And now you become the enforcer. Absolutely.
Well, I know that as media people, you have to have that conversation sometime.
Yeah.
Especially coming through the ranks. Well, listen, it's been great with you today.
It's been great, brother.
I want everybody to know that he fell short. I thought he was going to tell you about Ray Ray.
Ray Ray's always here, brother.
That'll be another story for another time.
Right. That's right.
But I thought he was going to hit it for a minute. But you're wonderful. We appreciate you. We want you to come back. And I've known you for a long time.
Many years, man. Many years, brother. I'm here for you anytime.
You're older than me, but that's okay.
That's right.
But make sure you guys make sure that you see him on Indisputable with Rashad Richey. Also, Dr. Rashad Richey Review on Sirius XM and on WAOK and V103. He's a hardworking man. He don't sleep 4 hours a day. That's what he said.
That's it.
I'm so proud of you. I don't know what to do, man.
Thank you, sir.
Ray. But keep doing what you're doing, and we really appreciate it. I know it was hard, for you to adjust your calendar.
For you though. I do it for you every time, brother. So I do want to come back. We'll talk about the testimony next time.
All right, we'll talk about Ray Ray next time.
There you go. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, appreciate you.
Appreciate you, brother.
Okay, it's been Rashad Richey, and just want to say that this show is not my comments now. or not the comments of Rashad Richey it's not my comments or the comments of this radio station. We have to hold them harmless for what we do. But you've been listening to the WCEG, where it speaks life to the community. And we always want to make sure that we do that in what we do. The topics and opinions are those of the show hosts and guests, and not WCEG Network at all. Thank you for your continued support. And remember, in all you're getting, please get an understanding. Thank you.